Hello everyone, my name is Chris Raiter and thank you for joining me for my presentation. If I were to Michael Bay the plant, this is how I would do it. Today I'm going to be talking about ICS, it's Industrial Control Systems, and the MITRE ATT&CK for ICS framework that was released earlier this year. I am a senior cybersecurity consultant and you can find me on LinkedIn and Twitter at CRaiterCBus. I'll also post these in the chat window if you'd like to connect up with me after the presentation. So before we get started, go ahead and bring up this page in a web browser. We'll need it for some of the later slides, but don't get hung up on reading it because it's kind of what we're going to walk through today. And this will also be posted in the chat window. So a little bit about me. I've been in IT consulting since 1997 and officially been focused on OT since 2016, but my actual involvement predates that, just didn't call it OT at the time. I've been involved in some NEI 0809 Milestone 8 projects. That's some work in nuclear plants, and also numerous assessments across the electrical utilities and oil and gas industries. This is my second BSides Columbus presentation, so I really hope you enjoy it. And a quick fun fact about me is that the picture in here, you can see me with a old beat up Hilux Toyota pickup that I drove across the Middle East for about 2 months. Came back to the United States for about 6 weeks and then went back over to the Middle East doing assessments at oil and gas facilities, except this time we had a more luxurious RAV4. The other photo is me at a nuke plant with the Homer Simpson pink donut. So why Michael Bay? I mean, obviously Michael Bay is synonymous with ridiculously huge movie explosions. And some of his franchise you may be familiar with are Bad Boys, The Rock, Armageddon, and of course the Transformer movies. So big budget, high concept, super stylistic, gigantic explosions. Other kind of fun thing that I didn't know existed was the Michael Bay Explosion Tournament, which is kind of like a bracket March Madness style breakdown of his movie explosions. If you're interested in that, it's obviously it's on the Wayback Machine at the archive.org. But before we kick into this presentation, I also I don't want to downplay the seriousness of catastrophic events, explosions, loss of life, loss of property. That's not cool, but I'm just trying to bring a bit of levity into the presentation by having some Michael Bay ridiculousness. And even catastrophic explosions are obviously will get you the budget and most attention and funding for remediation and projects in your facilities, just because they are catastrophic. There are also extremely dangerous situations that can exist in an industrial environment even without fires and explosions. So it's not just explosions, there's other things. But like I said, we're focused on Michael Bay stuff today. So electrical explosions, and see, Transformers, get it? Electrical Transformers the movie. Yeah, collective groan, I know. But here's some electrical explosions. Obviously, we have the, in the upper right, that's a Wisconsin substation fire that was ultimately determined to be a mechanical failure. And then the lower left, you might recognize that from, I think it was like New Year's Day in 2019. Or maybe it was New Year's Eve, I don't recall, maybe New Year's Day. There was the arc flash and transformer fire due to some voltage monitoring malfunction at a New York City substation. So there's some Michael Bay for you. And we can actually tie that into some recent events that have happened in the news. You remember all those mysterious activities that happened or incidents that happened in Iran this spring? There seemed to be some information that was kind of retaliatory from Israel when Iran attacked some water treatment plants earlier this year. Then all of a sudden, these industrial quote unquote accidents start happening across Iran. And also even more recently than that, some recent United States news is that the CIA has been green-lighted to attack some critical infrastructure in adversarial countries. Typically, critical infrastructure has been kind of off limits, especially like public targets. But now that that's been kind of made public, that critical infrastructure, the CIA has now been allowed to attack critical infrastructure targets like petrochemical, probably some power grid facilities in adversarial nations, and also some kind of hack and dump things, kind of like what Russia's famous for, kind of WikiLeaks. So that's going to almost certainly increase exposure for U.S.-based critical infrastructure to require more security activities by the aforementioned critical infrastructure industries. Oil and gas, electrical utilities, telecom. I mean, with the COVID pandemic, we've come to see that how many things are critical infrastructure now. Even rail, transportation, retail, Amazon, those kind of things, those logistical companies. So, unfortunately, those kind of actions give us as security professionals, a bit more. It might give us some more budget or some cause to do some different things. And one other interesting thing that I found out during this doing the research for the presentation is that this is on Twitter, so take it for what it's worth. That some Iranian groups were claiming responsibility for the USS the Bonhomme Richard fire that happened a week or two ago, claiming sabotage for that. So I don't know if that's related or not, but we'll see. So how does MITRE ATT&CK fit into all this? Well, I'll give you a little bit of attack on the MITRE Corporation or MITRE organization, if you're familiar with some of their other work. So they are basically a public-private partnership that's funded by the government to do independent research, information sharing in the public interest. They've done a lot of work recently with threat intelligence and monitoring trends by advanced persistent threats, or APT groups. And what actually is attack? So attack is in simple terms, just a knowledge base of adversary behavior based on real world observations. So it focuses on tactics, techniques, and procedures, the TTPs. And one cool thing about it is it's free and open source, so people can contribute to it whenever they want. If you want to, it's open for research. It's free to use in commercial, in reports, in commercial activities. And it can also be used with other kill chain models. And I'll show how it kind of fits in with that in a future slide. But this screen grab I have here is just a small subset of the attack for enterprise. And the across the top here, the column headers are tactics, and the column contents are techniques. So if you are on the attack website, you can click on these items for more information for each technique that's used. They do a pretty good job of defining everything. So with the ICS technology domain, they've branched out from enterprise. So why is there an ICS technology domain? Well, it's a different focus. ICS, as I mentioned earlier, is industrial control systems, and it's also referred to as operational technology, or OT, and a lot of times you hear those terms used interchangeably. Some of the things that compose the ICS domains are, process control systems, operator interface and monitoring, real-time historical data, alarming. Those would be things like HMIs. So some of these equipment would be like HMIs, like the human machine interface, which would be like, your display panels that you'll see in industrial settings, panel mount PCs, or engineering workstations, historians that log data of the system. Obviously, alarming systems. Also, RTUs, which are remote terminal units that are very common in electrical substations, sensors, all kinds of things like that. So in addition, we have like safety instrumented systems and protection systems, and those are typically separate components that form the safety systems of the industrial control system. So things that monitor like temperature and pressure, voltage, things that could really cause damage. They're specifically there for safety function. Fire is another one. And then also engineering and maintenance systems. Like I mentioned engineering workstations, and some of the maintenance systems might be a laptop or instrumentation that's used for calibrating and maintaining some of the industrial control systems. So here's just a quick shot of some OT devices. A feeder relay, which is something that you'd see in an electrical substation. The front panel, is a little LCD interface with some buttons, and the backside you'll see all those terminal strips for different inputs and outputs that the substation might require. In the middle is a SCADA RTU. So SCADA is also something that would probably be found in a power substation. And RTU can kind of thought of as like a bit of like a primary controller. It might connect to multiple inputs and outputs and sensors and actuators and devices, and then it's connected via IP or serial to some sort of primary controlling node. And these can be like panel mount. You'll see them stuck in panels or on walls. They're not necessarily something you'd see. You might see it in a rack, you might not. It just depends on that particular application. The final thing is a Bentley Nevada seismic sensor. That's the little silver can looking thing. And then Bentley Nevada PLC cabinet. Bentley Nevada is synonymous with kind of rotational equipment, turbines, generators, pumps, anything that kind of has a rotational aspect to it. They do a lot of work with vibration monitoring, and things like that to help detect predictive failure, overspeed controls, things like that. So you definitely see those. They're very common in anything that's like a power generation facility, like a gas turbine, very common. So why are people attacking ICS? And it may be obvious to some people, but adversaries have different motivations versus enterprise attacking. So in an enterprise, some of the things you might want to, some of the goals might be data exfiltration, or compromise of financial records, or maybe intellectual property theft, so things like that. Where in ICS, the goals are typically to impact and affect the process controls. Like we want the system to do something that it's not supposed to do or not designed to do. The technology is going to be different. You have embedded systems, like real-time Linux operating systems, or Windows 7 embedded, kind of highly specialized hardware that runs stripped down operating systems. And then you also have industrial protocols that are different than the typical TCP/IP. A lot of things like Modbus over IP, OPC, and a lot of these protocols are unauthenticated, and they're in clear text, so they're very easy to see and spoof and kind of do bad things with. And also some of the defenses that are in ICS networks, the immature security programs. Enterprise attacks have been around for a long time. ICS is getting more and more visibility, but there's still some immature security programs, and there may be like a lack of funding, especially in the municipal space, like wastewater treatment plants, to get adequate security in some of the more government or municipal based smaller government facilities. Municipal facilities might be more difficult. And there's a lot of vendor and OEM reliance. That means that basically the asset owner, the plant operator, won't do anything without the guidance from the vendor, with good reason. That when a vendor installs a system or an OEM installs a system, everything is specifically tuned and designed to run like specific firmware, specific patch levels. So those things won't get updated or upgraded until they've been vetted. I have a quick story to share, is that in some of our assessments, the asset owner will be like, can you give us some recommendations for improving the security of our systems? And, we go through the typical things like, hey, make sure your configurations for, your user accounts, admin accounts, privileges, patch levels. Make sure your patch levels you're using, current software, everything is patched. There's typical things that we recommend patch it as good as you can. The asset owner might come back and say, well, oh, okay, but we use Honeywell and we can't do anything unless it comes from Honeywell. That would be like Windows patches, application patches, and then we can just say, all right, then, well, just basically do whatever Honeywell tells you to do. Keep up with your maintenance contracts, and you can only be as you're as secure as what Honeywell will provide. So you also have that. Limited intrusions specific to ICS leads to a smaller knowledge base, and that's kind of with respect to enterprise. There are likely significantly more industrial tactics and techniques that may be used, but a lot of those events go unreported. The attack structure is more mature when it comes to enterprise. So there's a lot less. It's kind of like breaking new ground in the ICS space. So what are some of the differences between enterprise and ICS when it comes to MITRE's attack frameworks? Why did MITRE create a new matrix? Well, even though there is some overlap between enterprise and ICS, like you still have Windows systems, you still have Active Directory, you're still going to have Windows servers, you're still going to have printers. Things are very similar. But what MITRE wanted to do was kind of focus on the non-IT systems. They wanted to make sure that they could focus on things that were actually affecting or directly changing the industrial control system, like things that were changing the PLCs, the programmable logic controllers, the actual code on the devices, instead of just attacking the Windows systems with random malware. And there's I'm going to talk a little bit about the Purdue level, and there's actually the next slide coming up. It breaks it out in better detail. But enterprise attack deals with the Purdue network levels of 3.5 to 5, or 3.5 to 5, or 5 down to 3.5 is probably a better way to put it. And ICS attack deals with Purdue levels 3 down to 0. And I'll break those network architectures out for you in the next slide. And also, finally, the impact failure scenarios are different. If you take a look at the ICS framework and the enterprise framework, you go to some of the impact of the systems are different. In the case, like I said, in the case of enterprise, it might be like data exfiltration or IP theft, whereas on the ICS side, you'll see it's more about like denying control or changing control of the system, or preventing control, or preventing loss of safety. So for those who aren't familiar with the Purdue reference architecture, it's a way to visualize ICS networks and their relationship to enterprise networks. So we start with level 5 at the top. That would be kind of your typical enterprise DMZ, email servers, web servers, VPNs, VPN connections, Citrix, whatnot, being at level 5. And enterprise level 4 is your, kind of your back office systems, your domain controllers, your web servers, business servers, your ERP systems, and your corporate desktops. Level 3 is where we start to kind of get in that border, that difference between enterprise and ICS. So level 3 would be the plant DMZ. So it's like a boundary between the enterprise level and the plant level and the plant systems. You may see some of these also called layer 3.5, which is something that I have, I pointed that out in the previous slide. That may be kind of like another like sub DMZ, where you have additional firewalls, maybe up in this level and another firewall down here. And servers that do replication. You have your antivirus WSUS server that sits in these levels, and these might pull definitions down from either the internet or from a vendor site, so they can get deployed in a manner that's consistent with the requirements of that particular vendor system. You also have data historians. Data historians are used to typically feed the ERP systems of the enterprise, and also kind of monitor process health over time. And then you'll have remote access and jump servers as a way to drop down into the from the corporate network down into the ICS level. So you start getting into ICS, these are still kind of, you know, in level 3, still kind of enterprise, and that kind of blends in when you hit down into the ICS level here. And these are going to be your application specific systems for that particular control system. So there may be you know, energy management system or distributed control system that those applications and database servers sit in this level 2 and 3. And we down here, when we start to get into the layer 2 or level 2 and below, this is where the actual process controllers, and this is pure ICS down here. In level 0, you have the, you know, the field devices. That'd be like in a case of an electrical network, it'll be relays, synchrophaser sensors, voltage sensors, and in the, you know, in the case of industrial process, it might be sensor like, you know, like the Bentley Nevada sensors, or other equipment, temperature and pressure sensors, controllers and actuators that are all, they're fed up into the controller LAN, which is kind of level 1. This is like where these are typically hardwired. The sensors and field devices are typically hardwired to these controllers here. And then there might be IP connectivity up to this local HMI up in level 2 in these controlling systems. And it's also important to note that with respect to ICS networks, typically levels 4 and 5 are considered untrusted. So these would be untrusted zones with the firewalls. A lot of asset owners and plant operators do not allow any connections in from these. Just they consider those to be, you know, as secure as an internet connection. And typically adversaries will have to get down into you know, level 0 to levels 0 and 2, kind of in the ICS SCADA zone, in order to impact the systems. So here's the tactics and techniques of the enterprise ICS, or sorry, the attack for ICS framework. You can see it's a little bit different than enterprise attack, and this may be where you can look at the page that I had you bring up earlier at the beginning of the presentation, because it doesn't really lend itself that much to this tiny, you know, tiny screen. So you can get a better view of it. The left side of the matrix is pretty similar to what you'd see on the enterprise side. But as you start moving over to the right, that's where things really start becoming different. Especially these last 3 columns that I'll have in. I've kind of expanded other slides, so you don't have to worry about trying to view it here. Another cool thing that I like about the MITRE framework on their website is that you can click each of these. These are all hyperlinks. You can click each one, and it really breaks down to what the definitions or how they're defining each of these different techniques for the ICS framework. And I do want to plug into one of my colleagues, Stuart Bailey is a gentleman that I work with, and he's developed ICS flashcards for the framework. So he's put all these different different techniques into flashcards, so you can go through and kind of quiz yourself and learn different tactics and techniques, and kind of commit those to memory, so it's easier to talk about. And I've put a reference to that in a link to that in the reference section at the end of the presentation. So why do we focus on this right-hand side? Well, it's basically these events have happened. They're like legit things that have been documented, seen in the wild. So you're not bordering on speculation here. You're like, well, this stuff's actually happened. So when you're kind of working through different things of the framework, maybe you're doing threat modeling or something, you can see that, hey, these things have actually happened. Can we relate these back to our systems? So as I stated before, protecting life is the primary goal of ICS. I mean, you have your process and you need to protect the process, but life is the number one thing to protect. Second, you know, the environment and the property. You don't need you don't need like an oil spill or a chemical spill. You don't need things blowing up, catching on fire. And then finally, you know, protecting the process. And basically, as you can see in this impact section, almost anything that happens, loss of productivity and revenue, that's going to be a consequence of almost anything that happens in an ICS environment, whether or not lives have been lost or there's been any casualties or any other property damage. So, that's kind of where I get into the Michael Bay effect, is like these things are catastrophic and can definitely impact the asset owner, the company, or even the industry. So one of the use cases for the attack framework is mapping attacks to APTs. That's kind of what it was almost designed to. Dragos has had a lot of input into the attack framework, so they use some of their terminology and some of their APT names and when they talk about it. But that's the classic use case for attack. You can map it out, and there are actually links to this on some of their on their pages on the MITRE page. So you have Shamoon, which was the Saudi Aramco data wiper. Black Energy, that's a Sandworm APT. It's a pretty extensive modular coded rootkit that was targeted Ukraine energy sector. NotPetya, there's also Sandworm APT utility or malware that also targeted Ukraine energy companies, power grids, and banks, and actually spread to Germany by the updating process of some Ukrainian tax software. Triton, most likely Russian malware, specifically targeted at Schneider Electric's Triconex safety instrumented systems. And that's obviously one of the first malware that's specifically designed to cause a loss of life. Is specifically designed to disable and affect a safety instrumented system. So that way, if a process exceeded its parameters, it could definitely cause a catastrophic explosion and not safely shut the system down. Indestroyer is another one. Actually, I kind of like Indestroyer. I think it's one of the coolest names that they've come up with. And Dragos calls it crash override. So you'll see it a lot of times. ESET did some initial work on it. They call the malware Indestroyer. Dragos calls it crash override. So you'll see that both places. That's some modular malware that was designed to affect specifically targeted substations using serial connections or serial communications, IEC 104, IEC 61850, and OPC protocols. So that one was specifically targeted to the protocols that are used in Ukrainian substations. Some of the things that could happen is that it could be easily adapted to DNP3, which is used a lot in the United States. So this type of malware is something that may be seen in the future, kind of targeted towards some of the United States substations. So let's do an attack ICS walkthrough using Indestroyer and crash override. So there's a on the link here is it points to the breakdown that MITRE has kind of applied to the Indestroyer crash override malware. I said before, it was a substation attack. That was the Electrum APT. So that's the Dragos terminology there. And it was actually got in through the network through a data historian running Server 2003, which I think at that time, this was, I trying to recall if it was unsupported at the time. It may have been just on the cusp of being unsupported. But obviously it was probably not patched. So what ended up happening is the malware got infected into some engineering workstations and ended up sending kind of spurious commands sent to the reclosers, which led to the substation islanding itself. Islanding itself means it's disconnected from the rest of the grid. And that's something that can be the result of repeated operation of reclosers, either intentional or the result of natural events. Like that's pretty common when there's a blackout. It's the reclosers that have opened up the circuits to prevent electricity flow. So here's the breakdown using the tactics and techniques matrix that is provided by the ICS framework. So we have the initial access, the data historian compromise. Execution, the malware was actually launched by command line interface. In the evasion, in the masquerading, it took over processes of a primary server and node and kind of spoofed everything. So the other devices on the network thought that the rogue device was actually the proper device. Some of the discovery methods uses OPC calls and enumeration, serial device discovery, network connection enumeration. And a lot of these things are pretty typical in an enterprise, but the OPC and serial device connections are pretty much specific to ICS networks. Also in the collection phase, the malware looked for specific configuration files. This was a pretty targeted attack. They knew that the equipment that this substation was using was going to have specific config files in specific locations. So it went out and looked for those files to pull those into its database and search the network for other devices to to attack. Inhibit response. So acting as the malware is acting as a primary node, it can intercept and alter commands. So it can prevent that can lead to things like impairing process control. So now that if operators are trying to do certain commands, they're not going to occur. Or maybe the actual results or things, the actual commands and status that's reported by the devices doesn't get back to the operators. So you have things like, that's denial of control, denial of view. Those things are like actively prohibiting that particular action. Loss of safety and loss of view means it's a natural consequence that's temporary. It's not like they're actively, maybe device is resetting and rebooting. That would be like a loss where it's going to come back up and then it'll be able to take control or view that device. And then you have manipulation of control and view. Obviously, it's kind of like almost like kind of like a man in the middle attack a little bit. But one thing that you can see is that not all the tactics are used. There's a list. I believe it's 11 tactics, and here we have 8. So that's not important. It's not necessarily important that all the tactics be used. It's kind of some things may be used and others are not. So it don't feel obligated to try to fill out everything in one of the tactics, or fill out at least one thing in every tactic. That's not necessarily going to happen. And when I said initially how this works with other kill chain models, as you can see, they kind of omit the initial step. You basically assume that the initial access to the ICS network is through data historian compromise. How that got that far into the network, the MITRE ATT&CK ICS framework doesn't really care. It's just assumed that that's already happened. The enterprise network's been compromised somehow. And it leaves out the kill chain steps that you'll typically see about the recon, the malware development, the malware testing, that gets left out. So this takes place and kind of lets you do like a more detailed look after the exploit has happened. It doesn't worry so much about how it got into the network per se. It's more about how does that get into, how does that affect the network once it's in there. So this is one of the use cases I wanted to take a look at, how you can use the MITRE ATT&CK framework to do some threat modeling. So other than just kind of doing APTs and kind of diagnosing things after the fact, you can use this to determine and identify threat behaviors. So, you know, put on your evil cat, or I mean hat. You know, how can your system integrity be compromised? You know, the operators will know that. And also, you know, don't forget the maintenance staff. You kind of have to look at it in a different perspective. You know, many times the, you know, engineers, you know, will say like, why would someone do that? Or that could never work. And this is not to disparage the engineers at all. You know, they've done things where they've done failure scenarios. They've done FMEAs, the failure modes and effects analysis. They've done a lot of work about how this can how the system can fail and how the things can be prevented. But sometimes you fall into the trap of, you know, this is your system and you know it really well. Why would somebody do a particular action? And it doesn't even have to be malicious intent. It could just be it's an accident. And somebody, you know, screwed up or accidentally clicked this button or forgot to do that, or you know, there's all kinds of different ways that could happen. You know, so how would an adversary do some of these things? As we've seen with the Indestroyer, it requires domain expertise. It also requires a lot of resources and time. I mean, you're not going to like, you're not going to get like a script kiddie who's going to drop some malware and ICS network and do something. It's going to be more or less unlimited resource. I hate to use the phrase nation state actors, but that's pretty much a lot of the domain of ICS attacks. So now you can, once you do some of this threat modeling, you can, you know, build or modify your defenses to mitigate the threats. It's pretty typical, you know, defense and process, you know, improvement. You know, one of the things I wanted to mention about the, you know, kind of like, you know, how someone would Michael Bay the plant. The maintenance staff is very, very key to get their knowledge. Don't forget about them. Don't write them off as a bunch of old timers that have, you know, been here forever, because they'll typically know the systems inside and out. And in one of the locations that we did an assessment, you know, the question was, you know, they had Bentley, Nevada, they had turbines and pumps, and he said, what happens if the Bentley, Nevada system's down? What if you can't see these? You know, what do you do? Because the systems will still continue, the mechanical systems will still continue to run. So what they said is the maintenance department, they'll go out there every hour to each sensor location with a stethoscope and listen to the device, and do manual inspection on these turbines. That's just kind of the expertise they have, that they know, they can tell by the sound of something whether it's overspinning or the bearing might be close to failure. So that's definitely a resource you don't want to miss out on. Consequence-based modeling. That's also something that's, you know, very common in the ICS space. I can't iterate it enough. Protecting life is the primary goal. Environment next, and then protect the process. Safety is number one, and I just include the safety third thing because I think those are funny. I like the safety third stickers. I always get a chuckle about them. So what does your threat model look like? This is one of my favorite GIFs. So if you're in critical infrastructure, you are 100% a target. You know, like, as I said in one of the earlier slides about the CIA getting green lighted to go after critical infrastructure, well, that's just going to come back on the US as well. So if you're in critical infrastructure, you're 100% a target. Nation states, obviously, hacktivists, just kind of some of the things that are going on right now. I wouldn't be surprised to see some more hacktivism. And also accidents and human error. The attack framework doesn't necessarily designate between malicious and non-malicious. There could be things that are, you know, like I said, accidents and human error. The intent was malicious, but the outcome could very well be. Also, you have insider threats. You know, the whole Twitter breach that happened last week. Was it an insider? Probably. You know, somebody that got paid off. You know, who knows? I guess I'm not really going to speculate on that. And then also profiteers. So this was more for a presentation that I had focused on the electrical grid, was the potential for energy market price manipulation. So if you could somehow affect the grid, the pricing structure of what different grid operators saw, you might be able to theoretically manipulate the price of energy. So I want to just talk quickly about in the ICS. This shows up on the ICS attack framework, the configure virus or worm technique and threat and technique. So I'm going to just get my 15 or not even my 5 minutes of fame here. I was actually retweeted by Swift on Security after he posted the meme on the right and said, an industrial subnet of XP machines just continually reinfecting each other with configure. And then I just responded, yep, I saw this IRL last year. They've been happily passing it around for about 10 years. So it was a bunch of Windows XP machines and a Server 2000, Server 2003 box, had not been updated since 2009. No antivirus, no patches. That's just the way that the system was designed to run. And then somebody came in at some point with, we presume, an infected USB stick or a maintenance laptop that had it, and just passed it on to this system. Now, luckily, they were isolated, so they didn't really do anything. I mean, the virus, the configure worm, if you remember, just basically tried to grab passwords for like online gaming sites or something like that. So it's not really malicious, but it's there, and it's a real pain to clean up because you have to patch your systems, you have to take everything offline. And it's not specifically targeting ICS networks, but it's pretty common. You'll see it fairly commonly in industrial networks based on the unpatched XP systems. And actually in 2016, it shut down a German nuclear plant in order for them to remediate it because they had to take it offline and take care of it. So as part of this virus cleanup, when I did, when we did see it at a plant, it had been there since 2009. But was kind of interesting is the engineers who were in charge of the system were like super happy that we'd found this malware because they'd been kind of banging on management for years to get these systems replaced and updated. And now that they finally had hard evidence of a compromise, even though it was, not very consequential, they was kind of like, see, I told you so. They were able to get that out there. So that's one good thing that came out. So, to map that on the attack framework, the initial access right here, replication through removable media, impact, loss of availability, and loss of productivity and revenue. So it's not really consequential, but there again, the loss of productivity and revenue is going to happen almost all the time. And just getting into the last couple slides here. So thank you for staying with me this long. I know I'm getting on about 45 minutes here. I'm going to talk quickly about the NEST core failure scenarios. And these are failure scenarios that are specific to the electrical sector. And in 2015, a big collaborative effort came by with industry experts, asset owners, and academics. And they came up with working groups to develop these different failure scenarios of electrical grids. And I'm not going to get into the weeds of the failure scenarios. There's a link to it in the references section if you want to get into it. But it's this is going to be a transmission and distribution kind of scenario that I go through here. And this scenario does also include, or not the scenario, but the NEST core failure scenarios also take into account malicious and non-malicious cyber events. Kind of like what I talked about before, is like not everything is done with ill intent, even if it does cause some sort of consequences in the future. So we're going to focus on a distributed energy resource scenario, also known as DER. Those are things like cogeneration, like cogen plants, smaller wind turbines, not the big industrial size wind turbines, and also solar. This would be like the rooftop solar, not the gigantic solar farm. So in Ohio, we don't have a lot of this yet. This is very common out west, in Arizona, California, Nevada, where they have solar panels on homes and those things. those are considered distributed energy generation resources because they're at people's houses. So this is the NEST score scenario DER.1. If you read the NEST score scenario, it's all laid out right there. If you read the full write-up. So in this scenario, the distributed energy resources owner fails to change the default password or not set a password for the system interface. A threat agent could be, inept installer, hacker, or industrial spy gets access through the user interface and changes the DER settings, so it does not trip off upon low voltage protection, but continues to provide power during a power system fault. So what that basically means is something happens where the system is not shut off. It's still providing power to the grid or to some resource, but the person working on it doesn't know it. They touch they go in to do a repair, they touch some wires, and they can get electrocuted because the operators did not know that the system was off. So definitely, particular loss of life situation there. So while it's not specifically laid out in the MITRE ATT&CK ICS framework, I basically kind of brainstormed and kind of put some things together about how would this look when it's mapped to the framework. So, this may be different depending on the environment. Maybe you take a look at this and have some different things. So I hope, if there's some time at the end here, if someone has some thoughts on this, definitely, kind of bring that up, because that's kind of, I wanted some, kind of back and forth that we could have done in a live scenario where I could put up some scenarios and we could kind of brainstorm some different ways about how to use the ATT&CK framework to definitely map things out. And you can kind of apply those to different tabletop exercises or threat modeling scenarios that you do. So here we have, initial access, external remote services. Maybe there's some remote access VPN that is used for maintenance, and that's left open. Execution, well, the password's well known, they probably logged in and they're using the GUI. Persistence is something that we haven't seen before, but hey, they have a valid account, default passwords. The discovery, so you can go through control device identification, network connections, remote discovery, depending on what the capabilities are of that particular software or that application. Data from information repositories and role identification. Where does that particular piece of equipment sit in the infrastructure? Once you're in there, can you inhibit the responses? Can you suppress alarms? Can you prevent alarms? Can you turn things off? Can you turn things on? And these are things that are going to be specific to that application, where the subject matter expert for that application can maybe go through some of these different scenarios and say, yes, this is possible, that's not possible, or just kind of look at ways of how we defend against that. Impaired process control. You can modify parameters if you have access to the system. You could stop services. You could send unauthorized command messages, because obviously you're not authorized to do commands, so that those things would be unauthorized. Also, depending on the protocols, maybe if it's unauthenticated protocols, that might also be a case. And then, lastly, the impact, damage to property, loss of safety. The safety is obviously gone, and then you have loss of life. Damage to property, maybe because of fire. And then, of course, manipulation of control. If someone's skilled enough, could probably prevent operators from reversing the control, or maybe you can change the control. So there's definitely different impacts that can have here. I did leave some off, but that's just one way that you can use the ATT&CK ICS framework to kind of like categorize different aspects of your your threat modeling. So, and with that, I'm at about 50 minutes here. I'm going to wrap it up. And I thank you all for participating. Those that did, hopefully I can answer some questions in the chat or live. But definitely thanks for participating. And I'm sure the slides will be made available, but here's some of the references that I used that you can refer back to. and definitely get more information. You can kind of take this, basically take it, go forth, and kind of do your own thing with it. It's definitely a powerful framework and just another resource for everyone to use. And again, thank you for attending, and I hope you all have a great day. Thank you.